I'm Julie Zenner along with Dennis Anderson, and here's what's coming up on Almanac North.
Working late into the night Monday, Minnesota lawmakers wrapped up the 2013 legislative session in a flurry of activity. We'll find out how the bills they passed will impact Minnesotans.
After nearly 30 years at the head of the Natural Resources Research Institute, Mike Lalich will retire in June. We'll talk with him about the NRRI's past, present, and future.
And we'll have the business news and a news file story from 25 years ago.
So don't go away. Almanac North is next. Hello and welcome to Almanac North. Thanks for watching. This week's show was recorded on Wednesday due to the Memorial Day holiday weekend. And now here's Denny with our first topic and our first guest.
All right, Julie, thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Well, even for avid followers of the Minnesota Legislature, the final days of a session can be difficult to track. Now, some bills pass swiftly, while others receive hours of debate on the House and Senate floor. This year was no different as lawmakers passed a number of budget and policy bills in the final hours that will impact the citizens of the state going forward. Here to tell us what passed, what didn't, and what it all means is Senator Roger Reinert, a Democrat from Duluth, and Representative Tom Huntley, a DFLer, also from Duluth. And gentlemen, thanks for being here. Senator, maybe you can tell us from a Democratic standpoint, how'd the session wrap up?
Well, I thought your intro was perfect. I think even from a legislative standpoint, sometimes it's hard to keep track of all the moving pieces at the very end. You know, before the show we were talking off camera, and you know, I think it's been since the Easter break that I've spent more than 2 days at home, and you know, the last 2 weeks I don't think I have had more than 4 hours of sleep at a crack. And you know, you really get to the point where you're trying to get all of this stuff done before the wire, which we did at 11:58 in the Senate, and I think 11:59 in the House because they were waiting on us.
Representative Huntley, two very different assessments of how the session turned out. If you talk to Republicans, the Democrats who were in charge of both houses and the governor's office overtaxed, overreached, and what's your assessment?
I think we got a lot done. In my particular area, Health and Human Services, I'll probably talk about that later, but we had a very substantial year. And the final bill in Health and Human Services had a 5% raise for nursing homes who haven't had a raise in 4 or 5 years.
What are the big winners for our region, and who are the big winners for our region?
Well, I mean, two right off the bat. First of all, the city of Duluth. The city of Duluth has always had local government aid as a serious component of its budget, and that is to reflect the fact that we're a regional center and we provide a lot of services which go beyond the city borders, and it's not realistic that homeowners alone or property taxpayers in Duluth alone would pay for that. So we see a nearly $2 million increase per year in the local government aid formula, as well as the formula being revised. And the other are local colleges. Both Minskew, Lake Superior College, and University of Minnesota Duluth are going to see both increased state funding, but also flat tuition for the next 2 years. So students and taxpayers, property taxpayers, are both going to be winners out of this budget.
Gentlemen, $2 billion plus in new revenues being generated from this legislative session, the majority of that money coming from the top income earners. Now, your assessment on what's that going to do for business, and particularly there's maybe some troubling rattling going on in the state of North Dakota that they're going to try to lure businesses back into their state.
Well, I mean, I think for us here in Duluth, probably the bigger concern is Wisconsin. And, you know, no bill is perfect. I came out of this session talking about the imperfect choices legislators have to make. If it had been my tax bill to write, we would have started at a different point and really looked at the tax expenditures, the giveaways that we have first before we'd gone for a rate increase. But the governor campaigned on it. The governor felt very strongly about it, and the governor is out talking about it now. But we do have to be concerned with some provisions in the tax bill. Less concerning to me than the 2% is this new tax on warehousing, because it could have a serious effect on us here at the Port of Duluth. when ships come in, they can choose Duluth, they can choose Superior, and if they're coming in the Superior entry, they're driving by all of the Superior docks that are not going to have this tax in order to get to Duluth docks that are. So nothing is perfect. We have some work to do between now and the next session.
Yeah,
No.
I would just say, the number one thing that businesses are looking for is good employees. That's the number one thing that they always worry about. And as long as we keep our education level up, which we've done this year, both K-12 and higher ed, and job training, I think Minnesota will certainly outcompete the surrounding states.
Speaking of labor, daycare workers are now being unionized. Why was that necessary?
That they are not being unionized. What we passed is a law that says they can unionize if they can get the votes, and that would be daycare workers, and we also did it separately in the same bill, but separately for long-term care providers, personal care attendants, that sort of thing. But they have to vote. They have to get 50% plus one in order to have a union.
I want to get back to the $2 billion in tax increases because revenues exceeded expectations. The projected deficit dropped quite significantly, and yet that $2 billion in new revenue was pushed forward. There was an editorial in the Duluth News-Tribune saying that perhaps the Democrats should have exercised some restraint given the way the numbers were turning out. Is that a good argument?
Well, I think anyone can be a critic. And to those that are critics, I'd encourage them to run for office. As I said, being a legislator is all about imperfect choices. There are 200 other folks that are involved in this scenario, and this other guy called the governor, and everyone has to sort of meet their expectations. Between the election and the start of the session, I did a lot of work on managing expectations. Let's just take care of the budget deficit, let's take care of the K-12 shift, let's not cut things. We've spent a decade cutting, and then we can look at new investments. Well, the governor came out with a budget that included new investments and felt very strongly about it. So in order to move things forward, you compromise and move forward. I do think, looking back, it's really hard to argue with investments in K-12 when we have been short shifting our schools for a long time. It's really hard to argue with investments in higher education, and it's really hard to argue with investments in local government aid that's targeted back at our communities. So, I mean, there's plenty of things to critique after 5 months in session, but there's also a lot of good things to talk about as well.
A huge tax increase for cigarette smokers. Do you worry at all that enough people are going to stop smoking because they just simply can't afford it anymore? And all these revenue dollars are tied to smoking, funding a lot of programs. What happens if people stop smoking? Where does the revenue come from to fund those programs?
Well, we would be better off. The smoking in this state costs us about $3 billion a year in health care costs because of smoking. So if some people quit, and it's most likely that it's going to be young people that don't start.
So where are you going to go with the tax dollars, though? I mean, the revenue isn't going to be there.
Well, eventually it'll go away if kids drop down. And we've had pretty good success in the last couple of years.
Will you have to chop programs?
Well, we'd have to find revenues. Or
Find
cut programs,
revenues.
yeah.
Danny,
More tax increases?
I think you highlight one of the challenges, and that's policy versus politics. And we clearly saw a schedule that showed at what point does it become a diminishing return. Now, in an ideal world, you dedicate that money straight to healthcare costs, as Representative Huntley highlighted, because the number is 5-something. If you were to set the tax at what it actually costs the rest of us non-smokers, it's 5-something per pack. And you would dedicate it just to healthcare costs. Now, this is not a perfect world, as I think we've highlighted a couple times now. But we can take that same analogy and move to something else that didn't succeed that a lot of people would not have liked, and that was broadening the sales tax base. The good policy decision is to broaden the sales tax base. It's a dwindling source of revenue, much like the cigarette tax hopefully will be. And at some point, if we don't move from just products to services, it's become unstable already. It's going to become significantly unstable. But, we really are in a phase where people have to think hard about what they want and how we pay for it. And it's not always the politically expedient option.
Will dipping into the general fund become necessary, do you think, to fund the Viking Stadium?
Well, we've already, in this bill, what was done was via this increase in the cigarette tax, starting this summer, there's sort of a what's on the shelf now. You're going to pay a tax for that, and that's going to go as seed money towards the stadium. terrible option, frankly, but the electronic gaming is not keeping up, and
Right.
the state has an obligation now.
Now, tied to that cigarette tax, you mentioned the healthcare costs, and Representative Huntley, earlier in the session, the state set up the healthcare exchanges. Talk about that and what that means in Minnesota.
Well, I think, Minnesota's back in front. We're the leader in healthcare reform. A number of states have passed the healthcare exchange. We also have passed the expansion of medical assistance, so up to 138% of poverty. So there's about 30,000 people that did not have insurance will have insurance through that program. We were one of the first states to do that. We were one of the first states to pass the exchange. In addition to that, we passed a law that adapts Minnesota law to the Affordable Care Law in Washington. And that's very important because that means that we get to enforce it and instead of having people from Washington come in. So we've changed our insurance laws to match those so we can regulate our own insurance industry in the state. And then lastly, and we're the only state that's done this, the Affordable Care Act had a provision in there for what's called the Basic Health Plan, which allows the state to set up its own program to take care of working poor. And they delayed it for a year because they couldn't get the rules done. So we went ahead and took Minnesota Care and turned it into the Basic Health Plan. And we'll keep that going during this 1-year interim. And as I said, we are the only state that's done that. So that's a program that matches very well with medical assistance, but it's aimed at working people that don't get insurance where they are employed.
Is there still a $627 million hole in the next 2-year budget? And if so, how's that going to be plugged?
No, there won't be.
There won't
that's
be.
part of, so when you talk about the $2 billion figure, the first almost $700 million goes just to balance the
Plug
budget.
those holes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gay marriage, of course, was a big topic in the last couple of weeks. Are either of you surprised at how quickly that kind of moved forward this session and got done? And what does it mean for the state?
Well, every major corporation in Minnesota offers their employees what are called domestic partner benefits. And those companies don't care if it's heterosexual or homosexual, and it obviously means those people are not married. And why do they do that? That's again to where I said earlier, it's because they want to hire the best people they can hire. And so all the big companies have recognized what have been called civil unions. It's called marriage now, and it was very controversial, but I think it brings fairness to the gay and lesbian people in the state.
Senator, you mentioned property tax relief. Who's going to get it and how?
Well, part of the tax bill was the increase in local government aid. Another part that most people don't know about is the forgiveness of sales tax on local government units. The state was basically taxing the lesser units to help fill our budget. So the elimination of both of those things takes a lot of pressure off local government units, but we also included a cap on property tax increases for local government units. So we clearly said to locals, here's some additional money to do the things that you have talked about wanting to do that I know from the council you want to do, but we also expect to see property tax relief as a part of that.
Will that property tax relief mean less taxes or hold the line for a while?
We expect it to mean less taxes.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for coming in. We're out of time.
Busy session. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Now, let's dig into our news file archive for a look at what was making news 25 years ago this week.
Until now, the famous wood-carving collection of Jerry Holter was on display in a small log cabin in Clam Lake, Wisconsin. But soon, the $150,000 worth of intricately detailed art will be on display in downtown Ashland.
Jerry Holter from southern Ashland County is a world-renowned woodcarver. He's offered to sell that collection to the community with the use of private funds. We intend to use that Holter collection as the beginning point for the creation of the World Woodcarving Museum.
Holter decided to sell his private collection of over 100 pieces to the city of Ashland because he was very impressed with the progress the city has made over the past few years.
He no longer wants to have people visit his shop. He feels that he would just prefer to do the carvings and have them displayed elsewhere. So I offered him 3 opportunities, 3 different communities, and he picked Ashland.
Members of the nonprofit organization who are putting together the Wood Carving Museum will choose a site for the exhibit within the next few weeks. But city officials say the newly remodeled depot is the most likely home for the collection. In Ashland, Katie O'Keefe, KDLH News.
Years ago, the Iron Range mining economy was in a deep recession, and the wood products industry was suffering from weak demand. Area lawmakers and financial leaders were looking for a way to diversify the region's economy and create jobs. That was the climate that created the Natural Resources Research Institute, a multi-pronged agency dedicated to creating new economic opportunities in an environmentally friendly way. The man who has led that mission from nearly the beginning will retire next month. Dr. Mike Lalich, the director of the Natural Resources Research Institute, joins us now to talk about the NRRI. Mike, you got the job back in 1964.
84.
Or 1984. There go my bad eyes. How has the institute evolved over that time, and is it what you imagined?
Boy, it isn't what I imagined. I don't know that I had the foresight to imagine what has happened, but the institute has grown very nicely over that period of time. I'm so pleased and proud that I can say that we've been able to develop a cadre of very highly qualified, dedicated scientists and personnel at the Institute, and developed an infrastructure and a kind of a can-do culture that is, I think, hard to replace, that has allowed us to proceed.
Mike, what's in that mysterious-looking building up there on Highway 53 just north of town? And what goes on in there? How do you develop what you develop?
About anything that you can imagine is in that building, but we can start on a small scale, a bench scale, and because we're servicing the wood products and the mining industry, we're not afraid to pilot on a large scale new product development or process improvements. So we can do it there, and of course we've got the Coleraine Minerals Laboratory that used to belong to U.S. Steel. I'm very proud of that. We've become a regional, national, and actually an internationally famous laboratory, one of a kind in that area.
We have some old pictures of you and the governor, some local lawmakers. We'll put them up, and maybe you can talk about them a little bit.
Okay, that picture would have probably been somewhere near the dedication of our building in 1985. Governor Pertpich was a great proponent for the Institute. He could never say the name, but he was great. And so that was our dedication.
You haven't changed a bit.
Well, hair color maybe.
Now this is an applied research center, and how is that different from the research that normally goes on within the context of a university?
Applied versus fundamental. I like to look at it as a pipeline. Fundamental research is very important. It's at the beginning of the pipeline. We're closer to the end of the pipeline. So we measure our success perhaps not in papers, technical papers or anything like that, but in actual results that we can see with our clients, our customers, or being adopted by the agencies, state or federal, that we work with.
Can you talk about some specific examples of products or technologies that kind of got moved into the marketplace because of NRRI?
Oh, you know, there's just so many. One of the things that I really pride ourselves with is our ability to work with good area business people, entrepreneurs and small businesses. In Duluth, single out one, that would be Dave and Greg Benson. We started out working with them developing a wear-resistant surface on their True Ride skateboard ramps. It was a paper composite, basically. That led to scrap that we turned into Epicurean breadboards, and And then more recently, they've started LAL, which is outdoor furniture based on recycling plastic milk cartons. And now just recently, we've been working on thermal treatment of wood, and they have linked with another client of ours in Palisade, Minnesota, to start a company called Arborwood. They'll be selling decking and siding and things like that, thermally treated for rot resistance and
Mike,
dimension stability.
you've partnered with UMD's Center for Economic Development. How does that work?
Well, you know, early on we thought one-stop shopping would be the best way to go. If an entrepreneur talk to somebody in the university, they ought to get directed to those folks that might best help them. So we can be working with a company on the technical aspects of their product, but if they need a business plan or maybe some help in terms of putting a financial picture together so they can approach a bank, we can do that. So the Center for Economic Development is basically managed by ourselves, NRRI, the Leibovitz School for Business and Economics, and the Swenson School for College for Science and Engineering. So it's been an interesting ride.
So if somebody has an idea, do they come knocking on your door?
Sometimes, you bet. Sometimes we go knocking on theirs. We get our ideas from a lot of different sources, referrals, things like that. The one thing that I would say that we've really learned, we cannot be successful unless we get the good business partners or it just doesn't work that way. And not everybody is suited for that. Sometimes we just work with folks and they realize that, you know, this isn't for them. It's more work than they thought, or they don't have the resources or the management capabilities.
How are you funded?
How are we funded? We have a base level of state funding. The university puts in a little bit of money as the state funding has ebbed in these tough times. But basically, we take and get grants and contracts from industry, from the government, from other state agencies. So while we have about $3 million of a base state, we leverage that to over $15 million a year in actual activities. So we've got 3 or 4 times the grants than we do base funding. So we're what we call a soft money operation. Unless we get grants, we can't continue.
One of the things that's right there in your mission is that you want to do things in an environmentally sound manner, and you're working with new products, new technologies. As you look at things come forward, like say the non-ferrous mining that's going on in our region right now, and some of the environmental hurdles that these companies are facing, is there ever a temptation to kind of shortcut that a little bit just to get these jobs going?
No, we can't. We have to stay true to being scientists, and the scientific data has to be presented very fairly and openly. And so we don't want to shortcut. We can help. You know, we talk about ferrous mining and whatever, and I believe myself that we can do it appropriately. There are laws in place, but we've got a couple of projects now that are working on sulfate cleanup that with private companies that we think will be very helpful to the situation going forward.
Mm-hmm. What's your plan going forward for yourself? Is this going to be a launch into a second career, or are you really going to hang it up at this point?
Well, let's see. I'm going to be 70 on June 16th and retire on June 20th. I've got a lot of deferred things. This has been a great job. I love it.
Yeah.
Still have the enthusiasm, but there are other things, and only a 24-hour day.
Sure.
I've got grandchildren, you know.
Oh, I know. I don't mean to embarrass you by this question, but in 30 seconds, what's your legacy going to be?
You know what? I honestly think that we have a treasure for Duluth, and it's not easily replicable elsewhere. I think that this institute is probably not yet, if you put it in terms of a marathon, we haven't quite hit stride. And so I think with the guidance of the legislators and the university and the good people at the institute, that we'll see this go for a long time. And I hope my legacy will be that he started it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is a great place to end our conversation, and a great place for you to move forward into the future. Mike, thank you so much
really
for
good.
coming in and visiting with us.
All the best in retirement.
Oh, yeah, you bet.
It's time now for a look at the week's top business stories from Business North. With the price of gasoline escalating, potential users of less expensive liquefied natural gas met in Superior Tuesday. The discussion focused on whether there is sufficient regional demand to justify development of LNG infrastructure. Natural gas already is used by some large truck fleets, and it's being studied by the maritime shipping industry as a replacement for diesel fuel. To gain traction in this region, however, a plant would have to be built that converts natural gas into a liquid. The discussion centered on where a plant could be built and whether there's actually enough demand to support the venture, which could cost $100 million.
Opponents of the proposed Gogebic taconite mine near Mellon participated in a civil disobedience training session last weekend. Participants said that civil disobedience is their only remaining way to fight the project, now that Wisconsin legislators have streamlined the process to obtain mining permits. They learned protest skills, such as chaining themselves to machines with a bicycle lock. Gogebic taconite has applied for an exploration permit, which would allow the company to move drilling platforms and the Pennocky Range as early as June.
Magnetation has obtained $375 million in financing to construct a new concentrate reclamation plant near Coleraine and a new manufacturing plant in Indiana. The pellet plant will supply AK Steel's blast furnaces in Ohio and Kentucky. Magnetation's expansion projects are now fully funded, according to CEO Larry Leitonen, and the company will begin producing taconite pellets during the fourth quarter of 2014. When all plants become operational, Magnetation will become a 4 million ton per year iron ore producer, employing about 500 people. For more on these and other stories, visit businessnorth.com.
Do you have something to say about this week's program? Dial 218-788-2849 to leave a message or send an email to almanacnorth@wdse.org. You can also visit the WDSE website for the latest news and information from the station, a program schedule, and updates on your favorite public television programs. So, Danny, any big plans for the Memorial Day weekend?
Oh, I think maybe just relaxing and hoping the sun comes out for the weekend, huh?
Well, the forecast is looking like it might move in that direction.
A little better, perhaps. Yeah. Happy Memorial Day to you, too.
Thank you. To you, too. For Denny and the crew here at Almanac North, I'm Julie Zenner. Have a great weekend.